Everyone is talking about what they saw in this trailer. Almost nobody is asking the question Tolkien fans actually care about, which is whether any of this could have actually happened in Middle-earth. And I know why, because after 2 seasons of waiting, we are finally seeing Sauron forge the One Ring. I have watched that sequence more times than I care to admit. But would you believe me if I told you that is the least interesting thing in this entire trailer? Because packed into those 90 seconds are the biggest lore questions this show has ever raised, and nobody is asking them. Why is the One Ring being forged roughly 90 years too late? Can Sauron actually recruit a Balrog? And why did Tolkien himself once write a version where that is exactly what happened? Why are the Ringwraiths turning up 5 centuries early, wearing crowns they should not have? And whose hammer is that in Sauron's hand? And what does it tell us about the man he murdered to get it? Welcome to Kings and Rings. And from one Tolkien fan to another, show me some love and hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you think. Now, let us get into it. Let us start with the big one, because it reframes everything else in the trailer. And before I get into the timeline, here is why this season is different from the 2 that came before it. For 2 seasons, this show has been operating in the gaps, the stretches of the Second Age where Tolkien wrote almost nothing, where the show could put whatever it liked and nobody could definitively prove it wrong. That is over. Season 3 has walked directly into the one part of this age that Tolkien documented properly, dated year by year in the Tale of Years at the back of Return of the King. For the first time in this show's existence, we can actually check. So let us check. Here is Tolkien's timeline, straight from those appendices. Around the year 1500 of the Second Age, the elven smiths of Eregion, taught by a beautiful stranger calling himself Onatar, reach the height of their skill and begin forging the Rings of Power. Around 1590, the 3 rings of the elves are completed by Celebrimbor alone, in secret, without Sauron's hand ever touching them. And then, around 1600, in the fires of Orodruin, Sauron forges the One, and at the same time he completes Barad-dûr, both together, the tower and the ring finished in the same stretch of years. Then he puts it on. And that is the mistake, because the moment the One Ring goes onto his finger, Celebrimbor perceives him, feels the intent behind it, understands instantly and completely that every ring he has made is now a leash. He takes the 3 and he hides them. He sends Vilya and Narya north to Gil-galad in Lindon, and he gives Nenya to Galadriel. And Sauron, having lost the element of surprise, does the only thing left to him. He spends the next 90 years building an army, and then, in 1693, he marches on Eregion to take the rings by force. That is the War of the Elves and Sauron. It's a war of retrieval. He isn't fighting to make the ring, he's fighting because he already made it and got caught. Now, look at what the show is doing. Season 3 opens 5 years after the fall of Eregion. Barad-dûr is already complete, Sauron's armies have already overrun most of Middle-earth, and only now is he forging the One. Cause and effect completely inverted. And I want to be careful here because this is exactly the kind of thing that turns into a pile-on, and I don't think it deserves one. Think about it from a storytelling perspective for a second. If you follow Tolkien exactly, then the single most iconic object in all of fantasy literature gets created quietly, off to the side, 90 years before your season finale, and then everybody stands around for nearly a century preparing for a war. That is not a television season. That's a scheduling document. What the show has done is take the emotional climax of the entire Second Age and put it where climax belongs, at the end. Is it accurate? No. Is it the right call for the medium? Honestly, I think it might be, and I'd rather they moved a date than gutted the meaning of the thing, which they have not. Sauron still pours himself into it. It's still the act that dooms him. They just moved when. Here is something I find truly strange about the coverage of this trailer.
The season is named after a war. The official synopsis says it takes place at the height of the War of the Elves and Sauron, and almost nobody is explaining what that war is. So let me, because if you know this, the entire trailer suddenly makes sense. 1693. The war begins, and the first thing that happens is the three rings are hidden. 1695. Sauron crosses the fords of Isen and invades Eriador. Gil-galad sends Elrond south with reinforcements to Eregion. 1697. Eregion is laid waste. Celebrimbor is killed, and in the books it is ugly. His body is used as a banner. Elrond arrives too late and is nearly overwhelmed, and he only escapes because the dwarves of Khazad-dûm come out of the mountain and hit Sauron's army from behind. Then the dwarves retreat and shut the gates, and Elrond flees north with the survivors and founds a refuge in a hidden valley. That refuge is Rivendell. Rivendell exists because of this war. It was founded by refugees. 1699. Sauron has overrun the whole of Eriador, everything. He burns the forests of Menhirioth and Enedwaith to drive the elves out, and Imlad Rhys is under siege, and Gil-galad is barely holding the line at the River Lune, and Lindon is cut off. This is the closest Sauron ever comes to taking the north of Middle-earth. And now look at that trailer again. Dwarves sealed inside the mountain, elves protected only by the three rings in Lindon and Rivendell, fire falling on a settlement while Arondir watches, armies moving through the woods. That is not vague fantasy war footage. That is the tale of years filmed. And that is what I mean about knowing the lore changing how you watch. Every one of those shots has a date attached to it.
Now, the one everybody is going to argue about. At the Comic-Con panel, it was revealed that Sauron will come face-to-face with a Balrog this season, that the Balrog will help him forge the One Ring, and that it will speak, voiced by Simon Pegg. And the internet did what the internet does. So let me actually work through it, because the honest answer is far more interesting than either side is admitting. First, can a Balrog speak? Yes, completely unambiguously yes, and this is not even a debate if you have read the Silmarillion. Balrogs are Maiar, the same order of being as Gandalf and Sauron himself. Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs, was Morgoth's chief lieutenant and commanded entire armies, which is difficult to do in silence. And Durin's Bane casts a counterspell against Gandalf at the door of the Chamber of Mazarbul, and you cannot cast a counterspell without words. A Balrog speaking is fine. A Balrog with an accent might feel odd on screen, but that is a directing question, not a lore question. Second, and harder, where was this Balrog in the Second Age? And here the books are blunt. The Balrog that would become Durin's-Bane fled the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age, escaped into the east, and hid in the deep places under the Misty Mountains. And it stayed there, dormant, undisturbed through the entire Second Age and most of the Third, until the dwarves of Khazad-dûm mined too deep for Mithril in the year 1980 of the Third Age and woke it. That is more than 5,000 years asleep. So on the face of it, Sauron sitting down for a chat with a Balrog in the Second Age contradicts the text. Except, and this is the part I have not seen anybody bring up, Tolkien wrote of Sauron's return in the Second Age that he gathered to himself all the evil things of the days of Morgoth that remained on Earth and beneath it. Beneath it, that is a strange phrase to include if you mean nothing by it. And it gets better. In Tolkien's drafts of the Lothlorien chapter, there's a moment where Celeborn and Galadriel discuss the Balrog, and they conclude that no Balrog could possibly have been lying under the Misty Mountains on its own, and that it must therefore have been sent there by Sauron, from Orodruin, from Mount Doom. Tolkien himself, at one stage of writing, imagined a version where the Balrog of Moria was Sauron's, dispatched from the very volcano where the trailer shows them meeting. He did not keep it. It is a draft, not canon, and I want to be clear about that. But it means the idea the show is running with is not some marketing invention. It is a road Tolkien walked down and then chose not to take.
And even in the published text, when the Balrog finally wakes in the Third Age, we are told it was roused either by the dwarves digging or by the malice of Sauron. The door is left open right there on the page. So where do I land? I think it is a change. I think placing that meeting in the Second Age contradicts the timeline as published. But I think it is one of the most defensible changes the show has ever made, and anyone telling you it's flatly impossible has not read the drafts. There's one thing I hope they get right, though, and it's the most interesting part. Sauron and the Balrogs are peers. Sauron was originally a Maya of Aule, the smith. The Balrogs were Morgoths from the beginning. Sauron was never their master, Morgoth was. So this cannot be a scene where Sauron gives an order. It has to be a negotiation between two ancient beings who both used to work for someone far more powerful than either of them, and who both know it. If they play it that way, it could be extraordinary. If they play it as Sauron recruiting a monster, it will feel like toys being smashed together. That's the whole ballgame for me.
The trailer gives us Ringwraiths, crowned figures in pointed helms, one of them riding down an elf, another drawing a blade in the halls of Khazad-dûm, and a fell beast screeching down onto a balcony in Mordor. And it looks fantastic. Now, the show is calling them Nazgûl, which is a term invented for the series and not something Tolkien ever wrote. And the press materials confirm these are Second Age incarnations of the Nazgûl, men corrupted on their way to becoming the Nine. And it is also, by the timeline, very early. In the Tale of Years, the Nazgûl first appear around the year 2251 of the Second Age. The War of the Elves and Sauron ends in 1701. That is a gap of 550 years. The show has compressed half a millennium to put the Ringwraiths on screen now. And I understand exactly why. They are the most visually iconic servants Sauron ever had, and asking an audience to wait for a hypothetical Season 6 is not a real option. But there is a detail in that trailer I find fascinating, and it suggests the show knows precisely what it is doing. The crowns. These figures are wearing crowns, and crowns are not standard Nazgûl equipment. In the books, the crown is associated with the Witch King specifically. So why would you put crowns on all of them? I think it is because these men have not finished becoming wraiths yet. They are still kings. They still have names and faces and realms, and they are wearing the symbols of who they used to be while the rings slowly eat them from the inside. And if that is what the show is doing, it is a beautiful piece of visual storytelling, because it sets up the single most haunting thing about the Nine. We do not know who they were. 7 of the 9 are completely blank in Tolkien. No names, no kingdoms, nothing. We know the Witch King by his title alone, and we know Khamûl the Easterling, who is named exactly once in the entire legendarium in Unfinished Tales. That's it. 9 of the greatest kings in the history of men, chosen personally by Sauron, and history does not remember a single one of their names. That blankness is what the rings did to them. They did not just lose their bodies, they lost every trace of who they were. So if the show wants to show us those men before the erasure, with their crowns still on and their faces still visible, then honestly, that is a story Tolkien left an enormous gap for. Fill it.
Jamie Campbell Bower is playing Celeborn, and the trailer finally, after 2 full seasons, gives Galadriel her husband. And I'm going to say something that will annoy the purists. On this one, the show cannot be wrong. It is not possible, because Tolkien never decided who Celeborn was. And I do not mean he left a few details vague. I mean he wrote at least 3 different, mutually contradictory origins for him and died without settling on one. Version 1, the one most people know and the one Christopher Tolkien used in the published Silmarillion, Celeborn is a Sindarin elf of Doriath, a kinsman of Thingol, grandson of Thingol's brother Elmo, and he is called Prince of Doriath. Galadriel comes to Beleriand with the exiled Noldor. They meet in Doriath, and they marry. Version 2, which Tolkien wrote late in his life and which appears in Unfinished Tales, Celeborn is not Sindarin at all. He is a Telerian elf from Alqualondë in Valinor, a grandson of King Olwë, and his name is not Celeborn, it is Teleporno. He and Galadriel meet in Alqualondë long before the rebellion of the Noldor. They defend the city together during the kinslaying, and then they cross to Middle-earth together, of their own choice. Christopher Tolkien noted quite bluntly that this version contradicts not only the Silmarillion, but statements published in The Lord of the Rings itself. And version 3 from the earlier writings, where Celeborn is already the Lord of Lothlorien at the end of the First Age. 3 completely different men. And here's the detail I find almost funny. Celeborn does not appear anywhere in Tolkien's Legendarium before The Lord of the Rings was published. He was invented for that book, and then Tolkien spent the rest of his life trying to retrofit a history onto him, and never managed it. He remains, in the words of the people who have studied this most closely, a fairly insubstantial character, despite his enormous importance. So when the show tells us Celeborn was lost in the War of Wrath and has spent this entire time as a prisoner of Sauron, and Galadriel finds him in a cell under Barad-dûr, and he says he was trying to get back to her, there is no version of Tolkien that contradicts that, because there is no settled version of Tolkien at all. This is a genuine blank space, and the show is allowed to fill it. Personally, I am glad they have. Galadriel has spent 2 seasons as a woman with no counterweight, and Celeborn in the books is called Celeborn the Wise, a name given to him by Galadriel herself, who said he was the wisest of the elves then in Middle-earth. If they write him that way, he does not just give her a husband, he gives her someone who can tell her she is wrong.
There is a shot in the trailer of a toolbox, and inside it, a hammer. And the show has confirmed this is the hammer of Fëanor. And then we see Sauron raise it above the cracks of doom. Now, straight away, an honest note. Tolkien never wrote about a specific hammer belonging to Fëanor. There is no passage where the tool is described, no moment where it is passed down. That is an invention. But it might be the best invention in the whole trailer, and I want to explain why, because it works on a level I do not think most people have clocked. Fëanor is the greatest craftsman in the history of the elves. He made the Silmarils, 3 jewels containing the last light of the 2 trees, and the entire First Age, every war, every kinslaying, every ruined kingdom happened because of them and because of his oath to reclaim them. Now think about what Sauron is making, a single object made by the greatest craftsman of his own age, containing not light, but himself, and every war of the Second and Third Ages will be fought over it. The One Ring is the dark mirror of a Silmaril. And now watch the second layer. Celebrimbor, the elf Sauron deceived, whose skill made the Rings of Power possible, whose city Sauron burned and whose body he desecrated, is Fëanor's grandson. So the show is saying that Sauron destroyed the grandson and then picked up the grandfather's tool to finish the work. That is not in Tolkien. But it is so completely in the spirit of what Tolkien was doing, this idea that evil cannot create anything of its own and can only take what the good have made and twist it, that I do not care that it is invented. That is the difference between a change that serves the material and a change that ignores it. So, let us finish with what the trailer is hiding. We have watched a teaser about Sauron Ascendant, his armies everywhere, his tower complete, his ring nearly made, the elves sealed into 2 last strongholds, the dwarves shut in their mountain. Everything is going his way. And if you have read the appendices, you are watching that trailer knowing exactly how badly this is about to go for him. Because in the year 1700, with Imlad Rhys besieged and Gil-galad barely holding the line, ships appear off the coast, a great navy sent from Númenor by King Tar Minastir, commanded by Kir-Yator. They land in Lindon and at Tharbad on the Gwathlo, and in the south near Pelargir, and Sauron's armies, which have spent 7 years conquering everything, are caught between 2 Númenórean forces and annihilated at the Battle of the Gwathlo. The host besieging Rivendell is trapped between Gil-galad and Elrond and destroyed. Sauron flees south, gets attacked again, and escapes into Mordor with a small bodyguard and nothing else. His entire army gone. 1701, he shuts the Black Gate, and the West has peace for a long while. That is how this season ends, or something close to it, and it is the first time the world sees what Númenor can actually do, and it matters enormously, because Sauron never forgets it. Everything that comes afterward, the corruption of the Númenóreans, Pharazôn's fleet, the drowning of the island, all of it starts here, with a defeat so humiliating that Sauron spends the rest of the age plotting revenge on the men who beat him. So when you see Pharazôn in that trailer meeting an elven emissary, and Elendil leading an army, and Númenórean banners flying, understand what you are actually looking at. You are watching the beginning of the greatest alliance of the Second Age, and the beginning of its destruction at the same time.
So that is what is underneath the trailer. A ring being forged at the wrong end of the story for what might be the right reason. A war that almost nobody is explaining. A Balrog meeting that contradicts the timeline but that Tolkien himself once considered writing. Ringwraiths 5 centuries early, wearing the crowns of the men they used to be. A husband who has 3 origin stories and no fixed one. A hammer that never existed but should have. And a Númenórean fleet on the horizon that changes everything. And here is my honest position on all of it, for whatever it is worth. I am not interested in scoring adaptations out of 10 for accuracy. That is a boring way to watch anything. What I care about is whether a change serves what Tolkien was actually doing or ignores it. Moving the forging serves the story. Fëanor's hammer serves the theme. The Balrog is a risk that could go either way depending entirely on how they play the scene. And Celeborn, honestly, is not even a change. So I am going into November more interested than I have been since the very first teaser. Now, I want to know where you land. Which of these bothers you and which ones do not? Are you fine with the ring being forged late? Do you think Sauron and a Balrog can share a scene without it feeling ridiculous? Tell me in the comments, because I read them, and the last few videos have had some of the best lore discussions I have seen anywhere. And if you want more of this, the deep version rather than the shot-by-shot version, then you know where to find me. Season 3 lands on the 11th of November, and they're dropping 4 episodes at once before going weekly, with a prologue built to catch new viewers up. So if you've been away since Season 1, this is the easiest possible place to come back. I will see you before then. Until next time, keep reading the appendices, and leave a subscribe. I would appreciate it so very much.